Hello, my name is Frankie Romero, and welcome to the Frankie Romero podcast. Tonight we will be having a very special show for you guys. We will be talking about Lute Olson, a Hall of Fame basketball head coach who turned the Arizona Wildcats into a powerhouse and the city of Tucson into a madhouse when it came to college hoops. The Lute Olson era of the U of A started in 1983 until 2008, but his legacy is still alive and well. Olsen guided the Wildcats to 5 NCAA Final Fours, one national championship in 1997, is a 7-time Pac-10 Coach of the Year, and also guided the Cats to 11 Pac-10 championships during his tenure. But enough stats. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of Coach Olsen. And for that, I have 3 guests who were around Coach Olsen in different capacities. First, we have my dad, Francisco Romero, who is currently a Spanish broadcaster for the UA basketball team and was a broadcaster during the Olsen years. Also with us is Richard Page, who was the sports information director for the Arizona basketball team in 1998 until 2014. And Steve Rivera, who has written several books on Arizona basketball and covered the Wildcats for over more than 25 years. Gentlemen, welcome to Frankie's podcast. Let's talk about the history and legacy of Hall of Fame coach Lute Olson. I want to start off with you, Richard Page. I was wondering, how would you describe Lute Olson's personality?
Lute was a real interesting guy to work with because on the court he was sharp as could be, focused, dedicated, knew the game, was an excellent teacher. Off the court, he kind of let the people who were supposed to do their jobs do their jobs. So if you were an assistant coach or you were a strength coach or a trainer or like me, the sports information director, you were supposed to do your job and you were supposed to do it as best as you could. And, those expectations spoke for themselves because we were all able to do that and help the team sort of position itself to focus on basketball when it needed to. And when we did that, we were great.
Did you notice any coaching patterns in Lute's style?
Well, the one thing, and Steve could probably talk to this better than I could because he was there from the beginning practically as it relates to Lute. But Lute wasn't about patterns. He really was more about changing with the times. I mean, when you look back at the guys he had and the systems that he ran and the things that he did, he was running, big lineups, small lineups. I mean, you look at the team that went to the 94 Final Four, that was a 3-guard lineup when nobody was playing 3 guards. You look at the 97 team that won the NCAA title, that was a team, quite frankly, that didn't have a center. It was a lot, it was a stretch 4 before there were stretch 4s on the floor. So when you look at Lute, it wasn't about patterns and styles. It was, these are the guys I got on this roster. What are we going to win with? And that was always most important. That was the thing that, Lute appreciated and the guys who played for him did too, is the simple fact that winning was more important than anything else.
Right. Steve, would you say that your access to Lute was more than others? Did you happen to actually get in on any of the circles where the teams were having discussions about plays or anything of that nature?
No, everyone had equal access. One of the good things that I worked for the afternoon paper. So knowing this, the morning paper had deadlines. They had strict deadlines that they had to meet. So Lute would have his press conference close to deadline. So they were right on deadline. I was able to walk with Lute from the press conference with Bobby to his car. So that gave me another 10 minutes to ask my own questions and get my own story if I wanted it to be different than the morning paper. So that was kind of how I developed that relationship, just kind of walking with him for an extra 5-10 minutes.
Awesome. Would you say Lute Olson had a favorite player? Would you think of one player that was probably one he guided more than others?
He didn't always show it, but you could kind of tell. And I didn't cover him when he had Steve Kerr and Sean Elliott. But they were endearing. They're some of the 2 favorite sons of Tucson, but not really. He didn't kind of play favorites, and not in front of us at least. Maybe Rich would know that better than me, but not really. I think he coached everybody equally. He may have gotten on guys differently, but didn't show any favoritism.
Would you be able to give an example of maybe one of those players that he got at a little bit different?
Ricky Anderson. Ricky Anderson was one of the guys that he got on all the time, and I think that maybe because he knew his dad. His dad played for him back in the day in Long Beach, so he was on Ricky a lot. And Ricky was one of those great players who was good at a lot of different things. He could bowl, he could golf, he could do a lot of different things, and he was needed like the seventh man, eighth man, and he'd come in and do some great stuff. He was just kind of a guy that Lute liked to get on. Wouldn't you agree, Rich?
Oh yeah, I mean, in terms of Rick Anderson, he's the kind of guy that you could yell at to make a point for somebody else. You know, Ricky was a whipping boy for some reasons, only because it was easier to yell at him than it was to yell at the Jason Gardners, the Luke Waltons, you know, Lauren Woods, or whoever else may have been on the roster during any of those years. But yeah, to point out Rick is a pretty good example in this case.
Okay, here's a question for both of you guys. How do you feel about Sean Miller? Do you guys feel he lives up to the legacy left behind by Lute Olson?
Well, let me say this. It's always difficult to replace the guy who's got that legacy. And not that Sean did it, because he did it maybe a year or two after Lute had left, but it's almost impossible. And I think that Sean probably realizes that, and he's lived up to his own legacy. It's very difficult. No matter who, whether it's Sean or ex guy or ex coach, it's just too difficult. And no matter what he does, unless he wins a national title, it'll be too tough.
I would agree with Steve in that regard. Is you don't realize how difficult it is to coach when the expectation is a Final Four every year. You know, you can win X number of conference championships and stuff that goes with it, and that's par for the course. We've done that, and it's really hard to do that when the expectations are so high. And as Steve said, yeah, it, it it's a real impossible task to follow a guy like Lute. I mean, there are only, you know, a handful of guys who have had the impact on the game that Lute had, and to be able to say that you're going to come in here and be able to replicate that or do more than that is a super tall order. And if you could remove the expectations on Sean and the program over the last 10 years and just look at them for themselves, the numbers would be pretty good. But when you compare them to one of the all-time greats of the game, that's a different comparison altogether, and that's not a fair one to lay on, certainly to lay on Sean.
Absolutely, absolutely. What would you say, besides the 1997 championship, is the greatest accomplishment that Lute Olson has brought to the University of Arizona?
The '88 team, the first Final Four, was fantastic. It's always going to be Arizona's favorite son, the Tucson's favorite sons. Getting to the Final Four, one of the best teams in the country at the time, and probably in their minds, the best team that didn't get to win it. I think the 2001, in my mind, and I don't know if Rich will be biased with me or not, but I think the 2001 team, in my mind, is the best team he's ever put together. They lost to Duke in the finals. They might have had a call or two that was bad, but to me, that roster was fantastic and a good bunch of guys. In my end, and probably Rich's end, if you have a bunch of good guys that you love dealing with on a day to day and they're very good, there's no better joy because you have access to them and they'll tell you stories and they'll talk and makes your job easy on a great run.
I mean, I do agree that 2001 team was probably the most talented, and certainly in the time that I was there. Uh, a healthy Gilbert Arenas probably makes a big difference in that 2001 championship game. But in terms of your question, I tend to think a little bit more broadly, not specifically just on teams, because let's be honest, nothing in Tucson's memory will surpass what the 1988 team accomplished. And I think when you look at that and you look at what Lute did, he put Tucson on the map. And he put Tucson on the map not just in the public consciousness, but when you talk about a basketball hotbed, Tucson became that over the course of 25 years and so on and so forth. it became a place that was synonymous with excellent college basketball. And for that to happen in that location, in those circumstances, is borderline miraculous when you think about it. Because it's not like North Carolina, and it's not like Indiana, and it's not like,
Kentucky.
Baltimore and DC and Kentucky and New York City, where there are loads of talent all over the place. For Lute to succeed, or for anybody to succeed at Arizona, you've got to go everywhere else to recruit. And there's not a lot of homegrown talent. And for Lute to turn Tucson into a basketball powerhouse is legendary.
And Frankie hasn't asked me any questions yet, but let me get back to the 1988 team. I was a sophomore at the University of Arizona, and that team really rocked Tucson. They even had a rap song, and whenever the Wildcats played 1988, 89, 90, 91, the streets of Tucson were practically empty. Everybody was watching the Arizona Wildcats basketball game. I have a brother who was 12 years old at that time. Their first loss in 87, 88 was against New Mexico at the pit. And my brother, 12 years old, cried his butt off, after the game because no one could believe that the Wildcats could lose. And one thing that we have to mention is Sean Elliott, the homegrown kid who went to Choya High School, was a catalyst, and he opted to stay in Tucson and play for the Arizona Wildcats. I think Lute Olson started the process before Sean Elliott with Steve Kerr, but that team with Kenny Lofton, Tom Tolbert, Anthony Cook, the Gumbies, and some of those Gumbies played at that with the Bulls, and that special that's going on right now. But having said that, the 1980 team really made a difference in the start of the legacy of what Lute Olson left in Tucson.
If you remember that 88 team, that day they played New Mexico, that was the first week they'd ever been number one in the country.
I remember when the shirts were sold out everywhere in the corners. I don't know where Richard was in the '88, but Tucson was just crazy. And Speedway and Swan and every corner they were selling number one shirts.
I mean, I was a senior in high school in 1988. I remember that team well. The thing that's always impressive, the thing that I think the reason why that team is so special is because you always remember the rise. Or in any fan base, I grew up in Indiana and went to school at Indiana University, and the Bloomington Indianas or the Durham North Carolinas or Chapel Hill or Lexington Kentucky's, for example, Lawrence Kansas's. Those are basketball places that have been special forever. The reason why Tucson and you love that story is because you can remember when it happened yourself. Steve, you can remember that. Francisco, you can remember what made that special, and everything surrounding the team, and how everybody's watching the games and everybody's caught up, and number one rankings, and everything's the first and everything's the best, and it's the newest thing, and you're on the ride for the first time, and it's so incredibly special that no matter what happens, and even though that team was probably the best team in the country at the end of the year that didn't win, you'll always remember it because it took you to that place for the first time.
You remind me of the Fernando Valenzuela putting baseball in.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to sports, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It seems Lute Olson has meant something to you guys. In your guys' words, what does Lute Olson mean to Tucson, Arizona?
He is the father, probably the most well known person in this town. He's done so much. If he walks into a room, people know who he is. He still has that presence. He's always had that presence of being Lute. It's funny. The only time I've been with him for 23 years when I covered the team, I had never, ever seen his hair messed up, ever, until that night he won the title. I've seen it messed up a couple of times after, but never until that. He's got this regal, I'm Lute Olson, kind of walk into a room and say, that's Lute Olson. You don't mistake him from anybody. So he was kind of like the king. He just was for this town. He could run for mayor. Guess what? He'd win killing it. He wanted to be the whatever. He'd kill it because he'd win it. That's just how I felt.
Yeah, I mean, Steve's right. Lute gave Tucson the ability to feel good about itself.
Mm-hmm.
It gave the community something to rally around. And there's a lot of people that show promise. Lute was one of those guys that came in, made a promise, and then delivered on it. And that's a rarity. And for him to do it and to stay and to continue to build that thing year in and year out is something that's, I mean, that's why he's a Hall of Famer, because he was able to do that. Like I said, I mean, it's just one of those things where, like Steve said, he could have done anything he wanted within the town. That's because um, he made Tucson something special for everyone to take note of.
Hey, Rich, once you left me the credential, we didn't travel much with the team. When we did the LA schools. So you told me to go pick up the credential. I think you guys stayed at Long Beach, if I'm not mistaken, in a hotel there. So you had my credentials there. So I drove to go pick them up. And as I was coming out after picking up the credentials from the front desk, here's Lute and you guys coming from dinner, I think. And so the first one who walks in is Lute. He's wearing this black leather jacket with his hair well combed, and I wanted to salute him, or I don't know. As soon as I saw him, you freeze. So that's the kind of man he was, the kind of impact, the kind of security he showed with his team, with everybody. So I guess that's part of his personality, and I guess that personality made him so successful in however he taught the game of basketball.
Frankie, I don't know if Rich can tell you the story because it's kind of a little graphic, but it's very funny. One of the biggest things a coach can do at a different place, Oregon, Stanford, wherever, they just hated him. They hated him because Lute was, the guy they loved to hate because he was so good, and he beat them all. He loved beating them, not just little games, but huge games. So Rich might be able to tell you a story that we went to Oregon. We, as the media, went to Oregon, and Rich is the SID coming off a bus.
Oh, yeah. Steve likes this story. It was my first year with the program, and we're, you know, we're a preseason #1 team. I don't remember exactly where we were ranked at that point of the season, but it was still a pretty big deal. And we're getting ready to go to Oregon, and it was when they played in their old arena, MacArthur Court, which was seated about 8,000 people. It was an old arena, decks, balconies stacked right on top of each other, so everybody's right on top of the court. And they used to hold the students outside the arena until the visiting team would show up. So the team had to walk through the students to get into the arena and down into the locker room. Like I said, my first year with the program, it's my first time ever here, and we're messing around on the bus and getting ready to get off. And I got my bag and I'm standing in the aisle, and we usually let the coaches go first, but for whatever reason, Lute saw me standing in the aisle and he was getting something in his bag or his seat or out of his coat. He just said, "Why don't you go ahead and go?" So the door opens. The bus is shaking because the fans are rocking the bus. The bus is shaking, and door opens and people start to boo. And door opens. I climb off the bus, and as I'm making that last step to step off the bus onto the sidewalk, somebody yells, "Fuck you, Lute!" And I kind of poked my head up just to try to get a lay of where I'm going, because I'm the first one off the bus and I've never been here before, so I have no clue. And somebody realizes that I'm not Coach Olsen, says, "Hey, that's not Lute." And somebody else goes, "Well, yeah, fuck him too." The crowd cheers, and I got my head down, walk right into the arena, and that's kind of how it was everywhere we went. I mean, but that's Arizona basketball. It's like UCLA has a certain standing within the league and certainly within college basketball. But for 25 years, Lute made Arizona the standard. So whereas when you thought you were good, you were only proven to be good if you could beat Arizona.
Yes.
And that's and to a certain extent it's still that way today. And that's what makes Arizona basketball so special, that we can sit here and talk on a podcast like this and Arizona is still the standard. No matter what your expectations are, no matter what you think of who's performing when, the fact of the matter is when they talk about Pac-12 basketball, they still talk about Arizona first.
Right. One
And
thing
a lot of that has to do with Lute Olson.
One thing I noticed is Arizona fans seem to be everywhere. Whether you're in another part of the United States or even in another country, you find people wearing U of A shirts. You see the red, white, and blue, and you see the U of A hat. Why do you feel Arizona has such a good fan base? Like, do you feel that it came from Lute Olson?
Well,
Without question. Let me go real quick. Without
sure.
question, when you're winning and people want to join a winner, they'll join a winner. And they were everywhere. Stanford, Washington, they had little pockets or big pockets of fans wherever you went. They traveled well. They had a lot of alums in those spots. Everyone loves a winner when you're winning.
I mean, the one thing too that I think touches on. I mean, certainly when you win at the rate that Lute did for a quarter of a century, winning has everything to do with it. But I also think that traditionally Arizona has always played a style of basketball that was fun to watch. Whether it didn't matter who was on the team, whether it was Steve Kerr and Sean Elliott, or Damon Stoudemire and Khalid Reeves, or Miles Simon and Mike Bibby, or Luke Walton and Jason Gardner, or Derek Williams and whoever, all of those guys were fun to watch. And even though coaches change and styles have changed and basketball changes, the simple fact is Arizona basketball, generally speaking, plays some fun ball.
And one of the things is, even though Arizona didn't win that 2001 championship against Duke, Arizona beat Duke. Remember that game with a few seconds left to go? And I think, I don't know if it was Bobby Hurt or somebody lost the ball, and Arizona scores and wins. I mean, Arizona found a way to beat Duke. I mean, not that championship game, but they made it fun. That just showed how resilient and how, and as a fan at that time, when there were 50 seconds to go, 55 seconds to go, Arizona were down by 3 or 2, you always had confidence that Lute, I don't know how, was going to find a way to make the team win it, and it happened a lot of times.
Lute Olson seems to have this I don't know aura about him that you guys mentioned. He would come into a room and you almost felt the need to salute the man. Um, and a lot of players seem to respect him. You hear Steve Kerr talking about him and mentioning how great of a coach he was. Which player do you feel, in your guys' personal opinion, was Lute's greatest prodigy, his greatest a player he boosted to another level?
Whew.
Uh, Um, Uh, I think the guy who just came up on the scene, and right now, even today, I think he represents Arizona better than anybody can, is Steve Kerr. I mean, he wasn't well regarded or well recruited. He came on here in '86 or '85 or whatever year that was, and was just another guy. And all of a sudden, he turned into this guy who couldn't miss shots. He was kind of like the ambassador. Not allowed to tease Lute, but he teased him anyway in some of the things he said and got away with it because they knew he was a smart kid. He meant well, and of course, his father, when his situation with his father came, they they love Steve. Steve is one of those kids could do no wrong, but he would do no wrong. To me, that would be the guy that kind of represents the university, like nobody can and nobody will ever, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, it's tough to argue with Steve and Sean Elliott as the primary ambassadors of certainly Arizona basketball and the legacy. I mean, even when you bring that forward a generation, you can speak in similar terms to what Channing Frye and Richard Jefferson and guys
Luke
like that
Walton,
are
yeah.
are doing as well. Maybe in a slightly different, certainly, RJ and Channing are more commentators and stuff and aren't coaching right now, but Luke is. But when you talk about ambassadors and the charisma to sort of be able to, like you said, used to poke fun at Lute and all the stuff that goes with it. Yeah, those are the guys that come to mind first.
Frankie, how old are you?
Me, I'm 23.
23. Let's remember that Steve Kerr played 32 years ago. 32 years ago. Steve Kerr is still recognizable, still significant, and this is what almost 10 years before you were born.
Right, right. And he's actually the coach for the Golden State Warriors still.
And
And
Yeah.
significant people talking about politics, talking about sports, talking about whatever. Steve can talk about it.
And Lute Olson was a big part of making him what he is, right?
absolutely. What would you guys say was Lute Olson's greatest challenge?
Well, I mean, I think it's what we touched on a little earlier. It's making Tucson a basketball showplace. When you talk about the challenge, college basketball is college sports in general too. It's all about recruiting. It's how do you convince players to come play for you? And it's one thing to recruit when you live in Southern California and you've got a million high school kids playing basketball. It's another when you're trying to recruit in the state of Arizona that might produce one top level college basketball player in any 4-year period. Fortunately for Lute, the best players that this state produced over the last 25 years, the vast majority of them came to Tucson. But when you talk about the challenge, that's the greatest challenge, is to be able to recruit kids to come to a place that prior to his arrival didn't have much um, of a reputation nationally, that's for sure.
One of the biggest things that you do as a coach or as anything is to win and win and win. It's a lot of times it's hard to get to the top. It's even harder to stay at the top. One of the things he did was stay at the top on a number of different levels. He went to what, 4 Final Fours, 94, 98, 94, 97, 2001. I mean, that's not by accident. It's hard to get to the top, but it's one thing to try to stay at the top.
And it's from a man who lost his dad, what, at 4 or 5 years old, and grew up. Had to, and his older brother also passed away at an early age. So it has a lot to do with his upbringing and how he was able to uh, have this big impact on not only a city but a sport, college basketball. He's in the Hall of Fame, but more than for just winning. We talked about developing players, Steve Kerr, as well as others. Gilbert Arenas, I read about his story and talked about his story, and so it's about so much things that Lute Olson as a person did, and I think he's a great icon for the city.
Well, the one thing you touch on it, I mean, there weren't very many people that were going to outwork Lute Olson. I mean, that was the one thing when it came down to recruiting, when it came down to X's and O's, no matter what it came down to, Lute was going to find a way to outwork you. And a lot of that has to do with, the environment he grew up in that you touched on, Francisco.
Is Lute Olson, do you guys think, a once in a lifetime personality in whatever area? But I believe so. I don't know what you guys think.
I don't know. That's hard to say because it's like asking if Mr. Smith at North Carolina was one of those brothers. I think to Tucson, yes, but in the country, everyone has their own Lute Olson.
It's just one of those things that he's a unique individual as far as Tucson goes. But as Steve said, when you can impact the game in that way, you have an ability to find success wherever you may be, and it just so happens that he chose to do it in Tucson.
Gentlemen, I would just like to take this time to say thank you to all of you. Francisco for making this possible. Richard and Steve for coming and taking the time to talk to me and Francisco. I would like to end like this. If you guys could say anything to Lute Olson, would you please express it right now?
Thanks for winning. Thanks for winning. It's easier to cover a winning team than it is a losing team, and actually to recruit good guys, because a lot of my success is because I was able to interview good guys. I wouldn't have written 5 books had they not been good guys.
I mean, for me and for Lute, I always appreciated the opportunity. When you set out in this business and you have goals and stuff that you want to accomplish, working at the university for Lute and the men's basketball program was everything I could have wanted. And for him to see something in me and then once I got here to allow me to do the things that I thought were best for the program was an opportunity that I'm fortunate to have. I just want to say thanks.
And also thanks to Lute Olson, because I got to see him as a fan. And the first time I heard the name Lute Olson, I was actually working at Dollar Rent-A-Car. He rented a car, and we had the keys in his envelope that said Olsen, and everyone was talking about Lute Olson coming to pick up a car. So that's the first time I heard of Lute Olson when he first arrived. I was working at Dollar Rent-A-Car, and then being a fan, a student at the U of A when he went to the Final Four, and then broadcasting the games in Spanish. And thanks to Richard and Steve also. Richard would always bring me the players to interview, and he would always bring me the player of the game sometimes, and for Steve for always being there and supporting what we did. But thanks to Lute Olson for having giving us that opportunity to cover the University of Arizona basketball program like that. And thank you, Frankie, for keeping the memory alive. It's not going to die anytime soon, I know, but.
And speaking on behalf of all the current students, I also would like to thank Lute Olson for giving us such a great program, and setting down such a fine legacy and just a base where we follow to this day. We try to emulate this. And thank you guys once again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Frank.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
We'll see you guys.
Gentlemen, thanks for being part of Frankie's podcast. It sure was an honor and pleasure from hearing from each and every one of you about head coach Lute Olson. I bet we could spend countless hours talking about him and Arizona basketball. With this, I leave you all. Thank you for watching Frankie's podcast, and until next time, I am Frankie Romero. Be safe.
First 5-6 minutes now. Keep it going now. Go. W-I-L-D, Cats. W-I-L-D, Wildcats. W-I-L-D, Cats. Wild Cats.
First they all were skeptics. They used to put us down.
But Tucson, Arizona is a basketball town.
The other guys, they talk a lot. They said their teams got class.
But it seems to get real quiet once they've had to play the Cats. Oh! We're the Cats, we play out west. And we're working hard to be our best. Ask anyone and you will find we don't do drugs that wrecks your mind.
W-I-L-D, Cats. W-I-L-D, Wildcats. W-I-L-D, Cats. Wild Cats.
When Craig McMillan is in the game, he makes the offense flow. I'm gonna find the open man and get the ball down low.
And Cook himself, he plays the game like only C can do. Give me the ball and stand back and watch me jam for two.
Elliott's here, it's time to play. They want me in the NBA. When Tolbert plays, he plays to win. I put it up and it goes in. Huh. Give Kerr the ball, give Kerr a hand. I'll drill it in from three-point land. Ask Gumby, ask the rest.
We don't do drugs 'cause we're the best.
W-I-L-D,
Cats.
W-I-L-D,
Wildcats.
W-I-L-D,
Cats. Wild Cats.
W-I-L-D,
Cats.
W-I-L-D,
Wildcats.
W-I-L-D,
Cats. Wild Cats.
The big thing now is we got to challenge those guys as far as three-point shot. Okay, let's go. Come on, Tom! Kenny, you got to get on him now. He's the guy they're looking for. Sure. Who's got 13? W-I-L-D. Cats. W-I-L-D. Wildcats.